apology. The question then is, why this refusal? Is there something political to what Mr. Kamal Haasan is trying to achieve? He says he said nothing wrong, and now there are posters that have come up in Tamil Nadu saying that he should not apologize, even though what he said was erroneous and many people across Karnataka have felt offended by what he said. But first, let's listen into some political reactions and then we'll open this up.
இது அந்த ஊரில் இருக்கும் என் குடும்பம், அதனால தான் அவர் இங்கே வந்திருக்காரு. அதனால தான் நான் பேச்சை ஆரம்பிக்கும் பொழுது நான் உயிரே உறவே தமிழே என்று ஆரம்பித்தேன். அதில் தமிழிலிருந்து பிறந்தது தான் உங்கள் பாஷையும், அதனால் நீங்களும் அதில் உட்படுவீர்கள்.
See, they are confusing the issue. I think what I said was said out of love and with a lot of historians who taught me language history, and that I didn't mean anything.
I've been threatened before, and if I am wrong, I will apologize. If I'm not, I won't. It's my lifestyle. Please don't tamper with it.
Now, earlier in the day, there was a hearing in the Karnataka High Court. The court, in fact, came down quite heavily on Mr. Kamal Haasan for this very controversial and erroneous remark. The Karnataka High Court observed that no one has the right to hurt sentiments and that an apology could have actually helped solve everything. Pulling up the actor, the High Court also asked, on what basis was this comment even made in the first place? Was Kamal Haasan a historian or a linguist to even comment on this matter? The court said that one cannot hurt the sentiment of the masses. However, the actor could have completely, removed himself from this controversy by simply issuing an apology, but instead, he has chosen to dig his heels in. Not only has he refused to issue an apology, yet again he claims that an apology, if required, then that would signal malice. He's even refused to release his movie Thug Life in Karnataka, despite the fact that Karnataka happens to be a huge market. About 50-60 crores Tamil movies end up making in the Karnataka market. Kamal Haasan is willing to forego that amount of money for just a simple apology, which even the court was baffled as to why he was not asking that. So there was high drama that played out inside the courtroom. Kamal Haasan then shot off a letter to the Karnataka Film Chamber of Commerce. He claimed that his statement, where he said that Kannada was born out of the Tamil language, was taken out of context. The only thing missing in the actor's strongly worded statement was an apology. In its rebuke, the Karnataka Film Chamber has made it amply clear that they will not allow the film to be released without Kamal Haasan's apology, and that the onus is now on Mr. Kamal Haasan and his people close to him, to approach the film chamber for further dialogue. They've also added that the next course of action will be decided only after an apology is issued. The problem is this, that the film is due to release in the next couple of days, and if an apology is not forthcoming, as Mr. Kamal Haasan has made clear in court today, then the very release of the movie is threatened in a big market like Karnataka. So even as this political face-off continues, here's why the actor's claims about Kannada being born out of Tamil simply have no historical or political evidentiary basis. Kannada and Tamil do share the same Dravidian roots, but they evolved separately. One was not born out of the other. There is simply no evidence, no archaeological evidence, no linguistic evidence to show that Kannada evolved from or came from the Tamil language. From whatever we know, it developed separately. In fact, Kannada, the earliest known sort of writings of Kannada, inscriptions in Kannada, happened to be in the 3rd century BC. Tamil was in 1000 BC. Tamil, in fact, you can trace it all the way back to the Sangam era, which is, like I said, around the 1000 BC. Kannada is more in the classical era, and both languages and their evolution has been historically very distinct. Both do share some grammatical features, but they differ in syntax and in vocabulary. So there is no historical or linguistic basis to what Mr. Kamal Haasan has said, and yet he seems to be digging his heels in, doubling down on what he believes that Kannada actually evolved from the Tamil language. Dr. Suman C. Raman is now joining us. Author and Professor Chandan Gowda is Professor of Sociology at the Vidyashilp University in Bangalore. Dr. Raman, let me start with you first, because when we spoke on this issue, I think last week, you said this is a silly issue. Mr. Kamal Haasan should just apologize and move on. What he said was erroneous. He probably didn't know the facts of the case. But in the week since, he has not only doubled down on his message, he's refused to issue an apology despite the High Court asking him to do so. And now he's even risking the release of his movie in a big market like Karnataka. For what? I mean, what's he trying to prove? What's going on here?
Zaka, I'm not very sure as to whether Mr. Kamal Haasan has to be forced into an apology at literally at gunpoint, as it were. Look, I think what he said was factually incorrect. Should he have apologized? In my opinion, yes, that would have brought the matter to a close. But to say that if he doesn't apologize, you cannot release a film is simply unacceptable. Look, it is the duty of the government of a state to maintain law and order. If a state government is going to say, look, we can't maintain law and order, because of a statement which has been made, and it was not, at the most, it was a factually inaccurate statement. By no stretch of imagination can it be taken that Kamal Haasan had a malicious intent in making that statement, because the entire, conversation, he was actually addressing Shivraj Kumar. He was not talking in the air about the language essay. He said that he was part of their family, and he said, since Kannada is, that was factually incorrect. But
Dr. Raman, see, like I said, people can make mistakes. People can say stupid things, factually incorrect things.
Yes.
But here you have a real world, business of a movie, commercial interests of a movie, which I don't know who the producers are. I know Mr. Mani Ratnam has directed this. There is a very real life stake to what he's saying.
No,
and all he needs to say is a sorry for that real life stake to not be threatened.
Zaka.
So then what is he playing at? I'm afraid he's playing at something more political, I think.
No, see, the point is today he is, for all practical purposes, going to be a DMK MP in the Rajya Sabha, which means that he obviously subscribes to the DMK's ideology and so on. But that is not the point. My point is, should somebody be told, if you don't apologize, we will not allow your film to be released?
Okay.
I mean, if he has violated the law, file a case against him. That's absolutely fine. If you feel that what he said is a violation of the law of the land, then you can be free to file a case against him. But
so let me ask Chandan Gowda. Professor, I think that's a fair point that he's making. That look, at the end of the day, he may have said something stupid. Like I said, there is no historical or linguistic backing to what he said or basis to what he said. But does that mean that a group, or any group, in this case the Karnataka Film Chamber, has the right to decide that they will not release his movie, despite the fact that the movie's got the CBFC certificate, it's got all the requisite clearances for it to be released. In fact, theatre owners and distributors would be happy to release the movie. But this Chamber of Commerce has taken it upon itself that unless he apologizes, almost like putting a gun to his head and said, unless he says sorry, we will not release his movie. And the state doesn't seem to be, in any mood to try and tell this film chamber that, look, it's none of your business what can and cannot be released.
Yeah, Zaka, we know that there are two ways of looking at it, right? One is the rule of law approach, where we see Kamal Haasan as a citizen entitled to his views and his legitimate expectations to be allowed to speak his mind and not be penalized for it by these means. We know that, right? But we also know, especially when it comes to film stars and large communities and the emotional relations that exist between them, the Kannada activists are not the first to respond this way. And I think they want to see themselves as, we are not pushovers. Had this happened in Tamil Nadu, wouldn't you have responded like this? And I can imagine them imagining these sorts of scenarios, right? So please remember, Zaka, this is not a defense of what is happening, but I'm trying to understand what's going on here. Kamal Haasan himself is the producer. He's saying, look, I'm willing to risk losing my money. I'm going to stick to my views, and I expect the courts to stand by me. And he is entitled to do that. But in this case, what is happening is representatives of a linguistic community called the Kannadigas are trying to say what you said is factually incorrect, and we have watched your films, we have supported your films. Isn't it right that you should apologize? Now, their demands for an apology is not stemming from that of the constitution, etc. It's a community demand of a kind. So, this, and Zaka, like I said, the number of films that have producers and directors who have buckled down and censored their content in response to demands from hurt sentiments, there are dozens of such examples. And I'm not saying we should then accept this one too, but I'm only putting this in context to see why these people may not see themselves as deviants. They are actually viewing their actions as perfectly legitimate.
No. So, for example, Dr. Sumant Raman, if the opposite had happened, let's say a Kannada superstar came to Tamil Nadu and said, Tamil was born out of Kannada, by now, there would have been riots across the state.
Zaka, let's be very clear on this. The Kannada groups are very well within their demand and are justified in asking for an apology. That is not the point of dispute. But the way to look at it would be very simple. The state government, whose responsibility it is to ensure that any film that is passed by the censors is able to be released and should not be blocked from release because of a law and order potential issue. It is for the state.
But what about the High Court? No, 1 second. Doc. What about the High Court? What about the High Court? This is what the High Court today said. Okay, 1 second. Hear me out. This is what the High Court today said. Mr. Kamal Haasan is refusing to apologize because of his ego. You have allowed the situation to go out of control. Mr. Kamal Haasan is not a victim of circumstances. He himself has created the situation. Are you a historian or a linguist? Freedom of expression cannot be extended to hurting sentiments. You admit your remarks, yet you don't want to apologize. You want to earn some crores from Karnataka, yet you won't apologize. I mean, these are all perfectly valid points that the court is making.
No, these are, to the best of my knowledge, these are observations made by the court. They do not feature in the judgment
or the do you take issue with any of these observations?
Not at all. Look, Azaka, my point is also that there is absolutely nothing to be gained for Kamal Haasan by sticking to his stance. He should apologize. It's a different issue. My point is, you cannot make this a law and order issue. Let the people who are offended boycott the film. Or is there any compulsion that people of Karnataka must go to the theatre and watch this movie? If nobody watches the movie, second day it's taken out of the theatre, end of story.
Okay.
So I don't understand this. Whether it is somebody from Karnataka having, if they said the same thing in Tamil Nadu, my stance is exactly the same. Whether it was Padmavat, whether it was any other film which faced these kinds of issues, this kind of my sentiment has been hurt. Therefore, the film should be. Look, why do you have a censor board? Why do you have all these issues? Why do you have a court which is supposed to say what is free speech and what is not? Let him be prosecuted. Let the Kannada organizations file a case against Kamal Haasan and prosecute him in a court of law. No problem.
So
but
Professor
to say that a movie cannot be released is not right.
So, for example, if a lot of people in Karnataka, rightfully so, are offended by the comments that Mr. Kamal Haasan made, then instead of enforcing this kind of extraneous, almost extra-constitutional ban on a film, just don't watch it. I mean, give him zero business. That's a fair point to make. Professor Gowda.
That is one mode of dissenting. But in this case, Zaka, I must say, when communities are interacting with each other symbolically, law is not of great use here. If Kamal Haasan had simply said, forget apologizing, if it said, I may have got my facts on, I'll check and get back. Some gesture of admission of, I may have been incorrect would have gone a long way. What you saw instead was an intransigence and holding on to his, his claim and refusing to apologize, etc., which has not gone down well. So we're dealing with another realm of interaction here. So it's not law.
So why do you think he's doing that? Do you think he's doing that for political purposes? As Dr. Raman said, he's going to be a Rajya Sabha MP soon. I mean, obviously he can't go against the ideology of the party that he's going to be an MP from.
It's possible that he's trying to hold on to a notion of Tamil's antiquity and its first presence in South India, which is completely untenable. Like David Schulman's book, Tamil A Biography, establishes that concretely. Maybe he's playing to that constituency. Maybe he's holding on to his own conviction. I don't know.
No, but
it's hard to
the
tell.
fact that Tamil is an ancient language, I don't think is under dispute. I don't think that is a problem. What is under contention is Kamal Haasan saying that Kannada was born out of Tamil. That's the contention. I don't think the ancient or classical nature of Tamil is the issue here.
Zaka, being born means it came after. So the
No, that's not what he said. The
Yes.
controversy
No.
is the controversy is not what the controversy is not because he said Kannada came after Tamil. The controversy is, and we can play that bite if you want.
it
The
means
controversy
that,
is
it
he said
amounts to that.
Kannada was born out of Tamil. That was the
Born
controversy.
out of Tamil
Actually
means
inaccurate.
came after Tamil also. No. So the antiquity of not just Kannada, Malayalam, Telugu, they're all present at the same time as Tamil is present. This is well established, sir.
I'm not sure. I mean, like I said, I'm not a historian or a linguist, but I'm not sure that is quite the case. I think there is evidence to show that Tamil, at least
In multiple Zaka.
probably in hundreds of years. Was
availability of inscriptional evidence. Tamil inscriptions are the oldest, but that doesn't mean other languages didn't exist at that time. Anyway, that's a different discussion.
Yeah, that's a different matter altogether. I mean, I think the point of contention is that Kamal Haasan said something erroneous, which is that Kannada was born out of Tamil. That is clearly not the case. If he simply said, yeah, Tamil is older than Kannada, I think that would have still been kosher. And I think that there is historical sort of evidence to back that. But that's not the issue. The issue, again, I come back to it, Dr. Raman, and I give you the final word. I think there is something political happening here. I don't see why someone who has sunk in his own money to make this big magnum opus, the first time in 40 years, he's working with this legendary director. And we have an interview with Mr. Mani Ratnam. We'll play that out as well in a moment.
Yeah.
I think Mr. Kamal Haasan is sort of now fully playing his political neta role. And therefore, he has to appease that constituency.
No, Zaka, it makes no sense. He's got what he wanted, which was the Rajya Sabha seat. For all practical purposes, his party is defunct. It's sort of aligned with the DMK. So what purpose could... I can understand if this had been done 4 months back, where he was still, not the official candidate for the Rajya Sabha seat. Now he's already been named. He's got what he wanted. He's going to go to the Rajya Sabha. So what is the need now to sort of do this? But having said that, Zaka, a lot of the Dravidian, ideology is based on fiction. So, in that sense, whatever Kamal Haasan says, to some extent, it sort of parallels the Hindutva ideology. Both these ideologies draw heavily from fiction. So, I think that, the whole, if you go through the history of the Dravidian movement, much of it is propaganda. A lot of it is propaganda based on complete, fiction. So I think that in that sense, Mr. Kamal Haasan, identifying as he does completely with the DMK, may believe that this gives him some kind of a political mileage. But I don't see why he should have to do it now, because he's got what he wanted, which was the Rajya Sabha seat for which his party is sort of now, for all practical purposes, bound.
Dr. Sumanth Raman and Professor Chandan Gowda, we'll leave it at that. We'll see how this story plays out. The movie releases in a couple of days' time, and it looks unlikely that it's going to release in Karnataka unless, of course, something dramatic happens between now and the 5th. Meanwhile, the director of Thug Life, the legendary Mani Ratnam, he shared his views on the growing pressures of being politically correct in today's social media-driven world. Speaking very candidly, Mr. Mani Ratnam acknowledged that creators today must be much more conscious of what public sentiment is. There is a platform where people can come and outrage and can come and express their point of view, and therefore filmmakers need to be conscious of it. Yet at the same time, it doesn't mean you have to be completely bereft of any flavor. Those are the words that he used. Let's listen in to that exclusive interview.
So of late, people expect every movie to be, politically correct. Is that something that you also have in mind? Because social media is flooded, people, either appreciate films or social media in a way. Is it a disturbing trend that you see where you have to be politically correct every time you direct a film?
I think you have to be conscious now. People have a voice and there's a platform to say it out. They always had a voice, but now there's a platform and they put it out. But you can't be cowed down only by that. And when they're asking you to be politically right, it is also to be, it's to be decent, to be respectful for everything else, other sentiments, which is not a wrong thing to have, but it should not be a huge constraint. It should not bind you up into being, without any flavor at all. So you have to be aware of it, and then you do what you think is genuine for you. If you're honest and if you come from a place of honesty, then I think there's very little to worry about.
All right, let's shift focus now to the other big stories. As India's water strike suspending the Indus Water Treaty chokes Pakistan, China has come up with a veiled threat. a senior Chinese policy advisor, Victor Gao, has said out a warning saying, "Don't do to others what you don't want to be done to you." By making such a statement, China has hinted at Beijing's strategic advantage over the Brahmaputra River. Remember, China is an upper riparian state in the case of the Brahmaputra, and India is a lower riparian. The Brahmaputra, of course, is the second biggest river that flows in India. It's a critical water system, and therefore we will try and parse down whether China can do to India what India has done to Pakistan through the abeyance of the Indus Waters Treaty. Pakistan's all-weather friend China has now come to its defense, but here's why China cannot do on the Brahmaputra, even if it wished to, what India has done with the Indus Waters Treaty. Pakistan is witnessing an agricultural crisis after India put the Indus Waters Treaty in abeyance. India has no binding treaty with China on the Brahmaputra. There's only data sharing, hydrological data sharing through memoranda of understanding. The Indus Waters Treaty is one of its kind. It's a unique treaty. It's where two countries have a legally binding agreement which they have signed. Now, India has limits to control the Indus waters and the amount that it allows Pakistan to use. Reports suggest that Pakistan is staring at a bleak Kharif sowing season with a major dip in water storage at two of its key dams, the Mangala Dam, which is on the Jhelum River, and the Tarbala Dam, which is on the Indus River. China also does not have the resources to choke India with the Brahmaputra water flows, because the terrain around that area is significantly different from the terrain around the Indus waters, and therefore it's that much more of a challenge for China to try and control the flow of the Brahmaputra. India struck Pakistan diplomatically, but for China this would be a very costly affair. China cannot afford this with a country like India. China is also trying to enter the weapons market, the tier 1 weapons market, compete with the United States, Israel and Russia. It's already suffered a big dent in the Chinese ammunition that Pakistan Army was using through the course of Operation Sindoor. India is also seen as complying on the treaty. However, China's aggression could be seen as a bid to weaponize water. So the question then becomes, what actually happens if China stops the Brahmaputra waters to come to India? Now, here's why India does not have as much to worry about, because China contributes only 30 to 35% of the total flow of the Brahmaputra. Most of it is through glacial melt and its limited Tibetan rainfall. The remaining 65 to 70% is generated within India thanks to torrential monsoon rainfall in Arunachal Pradesh, Assam, Nagaland and Meghalaya. Also, major tributaries like the Subansri, the Lohit, the Kameng, the Manas, the Dhansri, Jia Bharali and Kopli, and additional inflows from the Khasi, Garo and Jaintia hills via the rivers around that region. Furthermore, it will be very risky and expensive to build and operate large dams in the seismically active Himalayan terrain. Large-scale and long-term control is not easily feasible for China. Unlike Pakistan's heavy reliance on the Indus Water River's systems, India's water systems are much more diversified. The Brahmaputra happens to be one among thousands of rivers in the Indian mainland. The Brahmaputra is not the sole water lifeline for India as a whole. The Brahmaputra is not a river that India depends on upstream. It's a rain-fed Indian river system, strengthened after entering Indian territory. We've got some breaking news in the upcoming Parliament session, the monsoon session that is due to begin end of June, early July. An impeachment motion will be brought forth against Justice Yashwant Verma. Minister Kiran Rijiju will be speaking to all political parties about this. The motion will be brought forth by Law Minister Arjun Ram Meghwal. Remember, Justice Verma was accused of keeping cash, unaccounted for cash, in the outhouse of his official bungalow. There was a fire incident that happened there on the 14th of March, and subsequently he's been removed as judge of Delhi High Court. He's been transferred to the Allahabad High Court, where he's not been assigned duty yet. Clearly, a large number of political parties seem to think that there is something fishy. A Supreme Court appointed three-judge committee has also found that there is enough knowledge amongst Justice Verma's staff about the presence of this cash, and there is no known sources of income to try and prove that this is accounted for cash. Let me go across to my colleague Payal, who has more details on this. Payal, so there seems to be broad political consensus on bringing this motion.
Well, Zaka, that's part of the report that has been submitted to the President of India that this judge has to be, he has to be impeached, and that impeachment can only happen by way of Parliament. It has to be passed by two-third majority in both houses of Parliament. That's what the norms really say as well. So government is going to bring in a motion. Our sources are revealed that, Law Minister Arjuna Meghwal will be bringing in a motion as far as this is really concerned. You need 100 signatures of Lok Sabha MPs and 50 signatures of Rajya Sabha MPs to bring that motion. That number is not a problem as far as the NDA is really concerned. But after that, to pass that motion, you need two-third majority, and therefore the government is going to reach out to various political parties. We are given to understand that Kiran Rijiju, the Parliamentary Affairs Minister, who the government has authorized to have a conversation, has already initiated the first round of conversation with the opposition parties, and it seems that the opposition parties are pretty much on board, and they are actually willing to come together, as far as this issue is concerned, because everybody is disturbed the way the judiciary has been shaped by an episode like this. And if you remember, Zaka, in the last Parliament session, there was a meeting that Mr. Dhankar, the Vice President, had called for, which was, of course, again another meeting where floor leaders of various political parties had come in together to build a consensus on a very important matter like this as well. So obviously, the government had already set the ball rolling in the last time that the last Parliament session really was happening. But now it's very, very pertinent that this has to be brought in the upcoming monsoon session of Parliament.
All right, Payal, we'll leave it at that. So an impeachment motion will be brought forth in the monsoon session of Parliament against Justice Verma. Whether or not it reaches its logical conclusion, we'll wait and see. But let's shift focus now to the other big story. In the backdrop of the Operation Sindoor, India continues to lead the global fight against terror. Nearly 2 weeks after India dispatched 7 multi-party delegations going to as many as 30-plus countries with 60-odd members representing the entire political spectrum from ruling party benches to opposition benches. The multi-party delegation headed by BJP MP Baijan Panda or Jay Panda visited 4 key Muslim countries in the Arab world. They are the first of the 7 groups to have returned to India. The others are expected to return in the next couple of days. Following the delegation's meeting with External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar today, I caught up with Ambassador Harshvardhan Shringla, who was also a member of that delegation, and I started off by asking him how easy or difficult, how receptive were these countries, which once upon a time were firmly in the Pakistan camp, now much more veering towards India. This is an excerpt from that conversation. All right, I want to go across to Mr. Harshvardhan Shringla, former Foreign Secretary. He was also part of the delegation that went to some of these Middle East countries, putting forth India's point of view. Mr. Shringla, thank you so much for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. You went to a bunch of Middle Eastern countries, North African countries. First things first, there used to be a time when some of these countries were firmly seen as, for want of a better phrase, in the Pakistan camp. Today, many of them are sort of, more sympathetic towards India's point of view. What did you encounter there? What is it that people were asking you about Operation Sindoor? Did you find a sympathetic ear from these countries as to at least understand why India did what it did?
Well, Zaka, you're right in saying that these countries do carry a fair amount of baggage when it comes to Pakistan. But on this particular visit, what we found was that there was a very significant change in perception when it comes to issues involving India and Pakistan. I mean, as far as India is concerned, I think the last 10 years or so have made a significant difference because there has been a very concerted effort on our part to establish closer strategic and economic ties with the countries, the Gulf countries. Prime Minister Modi's own visits to Saudi Arabia, to UAE, to Kuwait recently, and to Bahrain, the first ever visit by an Indian Prime Minister to Bahrain, has made a very significant difference. The perception of India as the 4th largest economy in the world, a growing economic powerhouse, a country that is increasingly taking up responsibilities in a troubled geopolitical environment, I think has definitely gone home as far as the Gulf is concerned. We found a great amount of receptivity to our, briefing them on the Pulwama attacks and our position with regard to dealing with terrorist issues in the future, the new normal. And I think from that perspective, although the Gulf states would maintain a certain level of equidistance on the public, space, but I think informally in many of our interactions with very senior and influential representatives of the government, elected representatives, business, media, and others that we engage with across all of these countries, we got very clear signals that there was far greater receptivity, that the message that we conveyed was a good one, a strong one, one that had reached the top leadership of all three countries in the Gulf. And I think from that perspective, there was a much greater sensitivity to our, view of the way Pakistan has, used terrorism as an instrument of its foreign policy.
But Foreign Secretary, one of the concerns has always been, especially in the aftermath of Operation Sindoor, that, while India may have won the war, the Indian armed forces have inflicted tremendous pain on the Pakistani state, and they've, done away with this distinction of state and non-state actors. But at the same time, there is a view that India needs to do more to win the narrative war. Did you encounter that people had, misconceptions about what India did or why it did what it did? As you said, a sort of equanimity being brought in between what India did and what Pakistan did, and so on and so forth. Why was there this thing that India needed to win the narrative war?
I can assure you that in all our interactions in the 4 countries we visited, there's the 3 Gulf countries, including Saudi Arabia and Algeria, there were no discussions when it came to a contest of the military strengths. I think everybody were absolutely comfortable with the fact that India had inflicted major damage on Pakistan's military infrastructure on the 10th of May when the ceasefire was concluded, that we were able to successfully penetrate their radar and air defenses and inflict damages on major air bases in Pakistan. I don't think the issue of parity in military strength or the issue of the performance of military platforms and systems came up, other than a brief discussion at a think tank in Bahrain, which is also an international think tank. It is not a Bahraini think tank.
Okay.
But nonetheless, I think there were no perceptions of India. I mean, everybody recognized that India, as an economic powerhouse, had the ability and the manufacturing and supply chain capabilities to sustain an effort over a period of time. And the longer this conflict would have continued, the more Pakistan would have been at the receiving end. I think there was appreciation for the fact that we were very targeted in our retaliation for the Pahalgam attacks, focusing on non-state actors and terrorist groups, that we did not target civilians, and in the initial phase did not even target military infrastructure. Pakistan had the opportunity for an off-ramp, which it did not take. It only took that off-ramp when things started getting heated and difficult for them.
All right. Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla, thank you very much for joining us, and many congratulations once again for being part of that delegation that went to some of the Middle Eastern countries. Meanwhile, Pakistan continues to harbour terror infrastructure in its backyard. That's not news to anyone anymore. While Pakistan's complex web of terror networks is a reality that the world is fully aware of, however, at times the world does turn a blind eye to it. But it seems like its motor-mouthed politicians, its army officers are now enough to remind the world of this terror-tainted history. First, it was these visuals of top Pakistani military officials attending the funerals of those terrorists who were killed in Operation Sindoor. And then that was followed by the annual Yawm-e-Takbir celebrations that were held recently in Gujranwala to officially commemorate Pakistan's nuclear deterrence against India. There, several top political leaders were seen sharing a stage with Tala Saeed, who's the son of Lashkar-e-Taiba founder Hafiz Saeed, among others, a UN-designated terrorist group. And if that wasn't enough, Pakistani politician in the Punjab Assembly, the Speaker Malik Muhammad Ahmad Khan, has claimed that he shared a close personal and family relationship with Hafiz Saeed. This is the Speaker of the Punjab Assembly, the biggest province in Pakistan. Hafiz Saeed happens to be the mastermind of the 26/11 Mumbai attacks and a UN-designated terrorist. But before that, Malik, the Speaker of the Assembly, Muhammad Ahmad Khan, he gave a clean chit to one of the Pahalgam masterminds as well. So once again, a mainstream politician in one of the biggest provinces in Pakistan, that is Punjab, is coming out and giving a clean chit to terrorists and saying that his father had a close relationship with a UN-proscribed terrorist. So why then should the world make this distinction between state and non-state actors? But let's listen in first.
मेरा सैफुल्ला कसूरी साहब के निस्बत प्रोफेसर तला साहब के साथ मेरी तल्लुकदारी किसी ऐसी बुनियाद की वजह से नहीं है। मेरा एक रिश्ता है हाफिज सईद साहब के साथ, मेरे वालिद मरहूम के साथ उनका बहुत गहरा तल्लुक था। मलिक रशीद साहब के साथ उनका भाइयों जैसा रिश्ता है। हमें इनके साथ इस मरकजी मुस्लिम लीग को हम अपनी दूसरी जमात समझते हैं और हम समझते हैं कि ये लोग पाकिस्तान की खिदमत करने वाले लोग हैं।
अगर ये सैफुल्ला मुलजिम है, आपका इल्जाम तो लगाए ना, और अगर आपने एक परसेप्शन बना ली है और उस परसेप्शन में आप मुझे दहशतगर्दी का इल्जाम बगैर तहकीक किए, बगैर इन्वेस्टिगेशन किए, आप इन्वेस्टिगेशन करते, तहकीक करते और तहकीक करने के बाद आप किसी को मोरद इल्जाम ठहराते कि ये, आपने तो 2 दिन के अंदर अंदर उसकी FIR भी काटी, उस FIR के भी इन्वेस्टिगेशन भी कोई कंप्लीट नहीं हुई, उसमें कोई एविडेंस नहीं है, कोई शहादत नहीं है, और आपने मेरी क्रॉस बॉर्डर टेररिज्म कर दी। आपने जो दहशतगर्दी की, आप बड़े दहशतगर्द हैं कि सैफुल्ला बड़ा दहशतगर्द है। मोदी जो अपने 25 लोगों को खुद कत्ल करके बहाना बनाता है, वो क्या कोई शख्स जो अपने हुलिये की बुनियाद पर जांचा जाएगा कि कौन दहशतगर्द है?
Well, the back-to-back terror admissions have exposed the real face of Pakistan. The line between state and non-state actors has been completely blurred. The farce that Pakistani politicians put up in parliament calling for peace has now completely been shredded apart. India's concerns about Pakistan's role have been legitimized as well. Why then is the global community, the United States, still turning a blind eye? And how can India be expected to join Pakistan in a free and fair probe to investigate what happened in Pahalgam, which is the demand that Pakistan had made in the first place? But talking about warfare, even as we're coming off this swarm of drone attacks between India and Pakistan that we saw during Operation Sindoor between the 7th and 10th of May, what we are seeing in the battlefield in Ukraine and in Russia is of an order, is of a magnitude that is almost unimaginable. What Ukraine managed to do through this recent operation called Operation Spiderweb on Sunday, one of the most audacious attacks on Russia since this war began. Over 100 drones that were planted in trucks and containers, which were then remotely operated, hit as many as 5 air bases, some of them thousands of miles deep inside Russia. In the process, taking out dozens of Russian strategic aircraft, including nuclear bombers. This is now a completely new paradigm to modern-day warfare. A $500 drone is taking out a $100 million fighter jet. That is the stuff of nightmares for military planners, and here's why. Ukraine's latest drone strike deep inside Russia has sent shockwaves through military circles. The operation carried out on Sunday hit Russian air bases and strategic aircraft. It may have changed the very future of warfare. Early damage assessments suggest up to 20 Russian fighter jets were destroyed or severely damaged. These included 6 Tu-95s, which are the strategic nuclear bombers, and 4 Tu-22M bombers. Also damaged were the A-50 Airborne Early Warning Aircraft, or AWACS. This is essential for detecting enemy missiles and air defenses. The attack, which was codenamed Operation Spider's Web, targeted Moscow's long-range air capabilities. But its implications go far beyond the immediate battlefield. Ukraine has basically showed it can strike targets deep inside Russian territory, thousands of miles away from its own border, and it can do so at a very cheap cost. Some of the drones used in the operation cost as little as $500. And the planes that they destroyed, each one of them is possibly worth up to $100 million. This was not a lucky strike. This was a carefully planned one. Ukrainian agents operated from inside Russia. Drones were smuggled in advance. They were packed into wooden boxes which had remote control lids. The drones were hidden in these trucks up to 18 months at a stretch until launch time. One of the targets, the Belaya Air Base, is more than 3,000 miles from Kiev. Getting drones that far undetected is no small feat. officials believe it would not have been possible without NATO's satellite surveillance. Ukraine did not notify the Trump administration in advance. No one from the Trump administration has come out and said that they had information about these drone strikes, but many in Washington doubt whether the Ukrainians were able to pull this off on their own. Smuggling and deploying drones at this kind of scale would likely need external support. Without satellite feeds, remote coordination, and surveillance data, pulling off this kind of a large-scale, precise operation would be near impossible. This strategy is similar to what we saw Israel do in a strike on Hezbollah in Lebanon last year. In that case, Israel tracked Hezbollah fighters in Lebanon using hacked pager data before using those pagers as ammunition and launching attacks which killed a large number of Hezbollah cadre. Like that mission, this one too, Operation Spider's Web, relied on infiltration, intelligence, and pinpoint accuracy. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky revealed that the planning for Spider's Web began more than 18 months ago. Meanwhile, US officials expect that Russia is not going to sit on its hands. Russia is going to retaliate, and retaliate pretty harshly. The exact nature of the Russian response is unclear just yet, but American intelligence seems to be on alert. The possibilities of Russian intervention or Russian retaliation include renewed drone attacks on major Ukrainian cities like Kiev. In fact, we've seen a step up of drone attacks on cities like Kiev and Kharkiv. Russia could also possibly strike on the power grid in Ukraine, something which they had agreed to, informally at least, in the last few months. And then, of course, there could be missile barrages into key infrastructure points in Ukraine. Since Russia's full-scale military invasion began in February of 2022, Ukraine has redefined how cheap technology can alter warfare. They've taken off-the-shelf commercial drones and turned them into deadly weapons. These drones have flown reconnaissance missions, they've dropped ammunition, they've even hit targets out at sea. Early on in the war, Ukrainian troops used shoulder-fired weapons like the Javelins and the Stinger missiles to try and halt Russian convoys that were headed out for Kiev. Later, they modified civilian drones and enabled them to carry small ammunition. They installed rocket launchers on speedboats, they targeted Black Sea Russian vessels using Harpoon missiles. Ukraine also slowly started moving towards Turkish drones like the TB2, which was used to destroy key Russian assets. Even plastic drone models were turned into weapons. The results have been surprisingly effective. The United States has supported Ukraine somewhat in its drone program. Washington has spent millions to ramp up domestic drone production in Ukraine. Key technologies have also been shared with Kyiv. But Ukrainian innovation has gone far beyond what anyone expected. Military experts are calling this Operation Spider's Web a turning point in this war. By coordinating such large swarms of drones to target strategic sites, Ukraine has shown that even small military powers, smaller countries, can hit giant global military powers. This was not just a tactical victory for Ukraine, this was a demonstration of strategic depth and strategic capability. But one strike alone is not going to change this war. The fact of the matter is that Russia still holds a large part of territory, up to 20% of territory in eastern Ukraine. It's not just going to give that up. Russian forces remain very much active in the Donbass and beyond. But the psychological impact of what Ukraine pulled off on Sunday is quite immense. Russia now knows that even its most prized air assets are not safe, including the nuclear strategic bombers like the Tu-95s. The attack also exposes weaknesses in strategic military doctrines worldwide. Air bases which have large aircrafts inside them now are potentially vulnerable targets. They can be hit at any time using very cheap drone technology. It's not just missiles and expensive high-tech weaponry that's required, but it could simply be $500 drones smuggled in trucks and launched from the ground nearby. This has global implications for the security architecture of the world. The United States operates dozens of small military installations overseas. Many are in regions like the Middle East, some in North Africa. The threats there are already high. There are these bases, lily pad bases as they are known, which are much more exposed to terror groups than they were before drone technology scaled up in such a big way. This strike might also force a rethink in Washington's security architecture. President Donald Trump recently announced a plan to build what he called a massive golden dome, a missile defense shield for all of North America, but particularly for the continental United States. The Pentagon is currently designing this golden dome. It is similar to the Iron Dome that Israel has. It is meant to guard the United States against all kinds of missile attacks, hypersonic, ballistic, even cruise missile threats. But the price tag of the Golden Dome is a staggering $175 billion. If a $500 drone can penetrate a $175 billion air defense system, then it does raise some very serious questions about the future of war technology. But as Sunday's attack shows, this kind of system, this Golden Dome spending billions of dollars, may not necessarily be effective or may not necessarily be able to stop cheap, slow-moving drones. Drones now fly often under radar. They go undetected for long stretches, for long kilometers, before they can be physically seen by someone on the ground and, if at all, neutralized. Drones also don't necessarily follow a predictable trajectory like cruise and ballistic missiles do. A missile shield which is built for much larger and faster threats may miss drones completely. Critics argue that the money that is spent on the Golden Dome, billions of these dollars, might be better spent elsewhere. The real lesson from Ukraine is that air defenses need to be layered, they need to be flexible, and they need to be capable of adapting fast. Drones are not just changing tactics, they're altering the cost of escalation. A small country can now cause serious damage with minimal resources, and it can do so without putting any troops on the ground, without risking any pilots, without any boots on the ground. This kind of asymmetric warfare has already proven itself in multiple theaters before this Ukraine conflict. But Ukraine is just pushing the boundaries even further. Modern-day warfare just took a paradigm shift. Talking about modern-day warfare, negotiations between Iran and the United States seem to have hit a wall. Donald Trump is very keen to wrap up the negotiations quickly because he needs a win that he's desperate to show. He doesn't even mind that if the deal that he eventually arrives at with Iran is very similar to the 2015 deal that was negotiated under President Obama, which Trump himself had pulled out of in 2018. But the main point of contention is this: can Iran be allowed to enrich uranium for civilian purposes? America says no, Iran says no way. As President Donald Trump seeks to hammer out a new nuclear deal with Iran, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is threatening to derail the talks. Netanyahu is threatening that he's going to launch massive military strikes on Iran's key nuclear sites. This high-stakes disagreement between Trump and Netanyahu has led to very tense phone calls between the White House and the Israeli Prime Minister's office. It has also led to rushed diplomatic meetings, both in Tel Aviv and in Washington, and it is now a full-blown, widening rift on how best to handle Iran's nuclear program. The United States and Israel share the same objective when it comes to Iran. They both want to stop Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. But their methods could not be more different. Trump believes now is the best time to push Iran into a deal. Sanctions have weakened the Iranian economy, there is internal unrest against the Iranian regime, and all of this has put pressure on the leadership of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Trump sees these conditions as an opportunity to strike a diplomatic breakthrough. According to Trump, a successful agreement could be just days away. He hinted on Sunday that something good might come from the talks very soon.
I think we have a chance of making a deal with Iran also. They don't want to be blown up. They would rather make a deal. And I think that could happen in the not too distant future. That would be a great thing if we could have a deal without bombs being dropped all over the Middle East. That would be a very good thing. They can't have a nuclear weapon. We want them to be safe. We want them to have a very, very successful nation. Let it be a great nation, but we can't have that. They cannot have a nuclear weapon. It's very simple. And I think we're fairly close to a deal with Iran.
Netanyahu, on the other hand, sees this as a fleeting moment to act decisively and act militarily. He believes Iran's vulnerability will not last for a long time. In Netanyahu's view, a swift Israeli strike would cripple Iran's nuclear capabilities once and for all. He is impatient with the diplomatic approach. He's afraid that Trump might give away too much in order to secure a deal that he can promote is tougher than the one that President Obama had signed with Iran in 2015. Tensions between Trump and Netanyahu have escalated behind the scenes. At least one intense phone call took place this past week between the two leaders. Trump, in fact, warned Netanyahu against launching any kind of military attack, even while the negotiations were on between America and Iran. Trump has already discouraged an Israeli plan to strike Iran's nuclear facilities earlier this year. Reports also suggest that Trump managed to convince Netanyahu to stand down, at least temporarily, to allow some more room for diplomacy. But Israeli officials are growing restless. They have continued to prepare for the possibility of acting alone without America. In October, Israel destroyed key elements of Iran's strategic air defenses. That move significantly reduced the risk of Israeli jets being targeted if they flew very close to Iranian territory. In parallel, Israel has weakened Iranian-backed groups like Hezbollah and Hamas, neutralizing these potential threats to Israeli forces during any future air campaign. For Netanyahu, these developments present an opening like he hasn't seen in the last 30 years. Netanyahu argues that Iran has never been more exposed as it is now, and delaying any military action would close out this window permanently. At the center of the US-Iran talks is one major sticking point, which is the enrichment of uranium. The Trump administration wants Iran to stop all enrichment activity inside the country. Iran refuses to do that. Iran's chief negotiator, who is the foreign minister Abbas Araghchi, has made it clear that if the West insists on zero enrichment, then there is no reason to continue the discussion. To bridge this divide, Steve Witkoff, who is Trump's Middle East envoy and chief negotiator with Iran, has been working with officials from Oman to try and explore some creative compromises with Iran. One idea which is under consideration involves a regional collaboration which will produce nuclear fuel. This would involve Iran, Saudi Arabia, and some of the other Arab countries. The United States might also play a role, but even this proposal has not addressed the critical issue, which is where the actual enrichment would take place. That itself is a red line for Israel. Israeli officials fear Trump's eagerness to try and get a deal going could lead him to accept some kind of a for deal where Iran retains its nuclear infrastructure and yet it continues to stop enriching. That, according to Israel, would be a massive mistake. For Netanyahu, a good deal means total dismantlement of Iran's nuclear network. That includes underground enrichment plants at Natanz, also in the Fordo deserts, as well as other hidden facilities that are spread across the length and breadth of Iran. Anything less, in the Israeli view, simply delays the inevitable, and that allows Iran to keep its bomb-making capability intact. Netanyahu believes diplomacy will not stop Iran. Only force will, or at least the credible threat of force, will work. He's made this case repeatedly in private and in public. Israeli officials claim they are serious this time. They're not bluffing, they're not stalling, they are prepared to strike even without American support. Netanyahu is also driven by suspicion. He suspects Trump is chasing a legacy deal, a pact that could be sold to the public as tougher and smarter than the 2015 deal with Obama. That desire, the Israelis fear, could cause Trump to make dangerous concessions, especially allowing Iran to continue enriching uranium at lower levels. In recent days, the pace of diplomatic activity has quickened. Top Israeli officials, including Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer and Mossad Chief David Barnea, have been meeting with key U.S. intelligence and diplomatic figures. They first met with Witkoff in Rome, then they flew to Washington for a session with CIA Director John Ratcliffe. Dermer later reconnected with Witkoff in a follow-up meeting. These talks are all aimed at ironing out differences between the US and Israel. But those differences have not been fully closed yet. There is a huge gap between Israeli demands and American strategy. Trump's current push to negotiate the nuclear deal follows years of heated rhetoric. When he campaigned in 2016, when he ran for office for the first time, he called the Obama deal a disaster. He said it allowed Iran to continue enriching uranium and delayed the nuclear threat rather than eliminating it once and for all. In 2018, Trump officially withdrew from that agreement and reinstated sanctions on Iran. But the effect of those sanctions have been mixed. While they've hurt Iran economically, they have not stopped Iran's nuclear program. In fact, Iran has since resumed and even improved its uranium enrichment. Tehran now produces uranium at 60% purity, which is dangerously close to the 90% purity that is required to make a nuclear bomb. US intelligence estimates suggest that Iran could produce enough weapons-grade or bomb-grade fuel within weeks, and eventually they could build a nuclear weapon within just months. Israel's stand that they've taken currently is not a new one. Over the past 2 decades, Israeli leaders have often threatened military action against Iran, but they have ultimately, when push came to shove, they stepped back. What is unclear this time, though, is whether Netanyahu is simply using this again as a threat, much like we've seen in the past, or whether he genuinely plans to follow through on that threat. The coming days will be critical. If the US and Iran find even modest common ground or modest agreement, that could shift the course of diplomacy. But if those talks fail, and if Israel decides that it can no longer wait, then the region itself could be on the brink of another war, a much bigger, wider, and longer war. For now, Trump and Netanyahu are locked in a high-stakes battle. One is betting on negotiation, the other is betting on force. The outcome could reshape not just the future of Iran's nuclear program, but the entire balance of power in the Middle East.
Co-presented by. This is News 18 Network. India's largest news network.
The Karnataka High Court observed that this entire circumstance has been created because of Kamal Haasan's statement, and for now the actor coming to the High Court seeking protection, and in fact the High Court has asked if it's fair. In fact, the High Court said nobody has the right to hurt sentiments of people, and the High Court even questioned Kamal Haasan and said, I quote here, "On what basis are you speaking? Are you a historian or a linguist?" Now, Kamal Haasan has also written a letter to the Karnataka Film Chamber of Commerce asking for statement to be not misinterpreted. However, in this entire letter, Kamal Haasan has not apologized. Remember, the matter now comes up for hearing at around 2:30 in the afternoon. That's the time that the court has given for the counsel for Kamal Haasan to get back to the actor and see if the actor wants to apologize, because the court is very clear. The best way out for everyone here is for the actor to apologize and end this matter here. In fact, we have Purnima Murli joining us for more on this. Purnima, 2 hours that the Kamal Haasan Council has got. Has there been any sort of a brainstorming that's happening on the way ahead for the actor and his legal team now?
Well, discussions are still going on. Sources from Kamal's team say that they are still holding discussions, and that a decision will be taken. But in terms of whether Kamal Haasan would consider his decision to not apologize, all eyes on that. But only by 2:30 there will be clarity, because currently discussions are on between Kamal Haasan and his legal team to see how best they can work this out. But in the meantime, there have been posters in parts of the state from his own party, the Makkal Needi Mayam, saying that love needs no apology, truth will never bow, and reiterating what Kamal Haasan had earlier said, that he made that statement out of love and that does not need an apology. He will not apologize if he hasn't done anything wrong. So far, he said that he's faced similar situations wherein he was threatened and warned, but that will not stop him because he says that he will only apologize if he's made a mistake. In this context, he says it was only out of love that he made the statement and it's been blown out of proportion.
Well, it's been blown out of proportion is what Kamal Haasan claims. We'll have to see if there will be a rethink after the kind of stringent views that the Karnataka High Court has had in the initial part of the entire argument that took place. fact, there is a piece of breaking news.
Hello and welcome to the Hard Facts with me, Ayushman Singh Jamwa. Ladies and gentlemen, it just does not stop. We have seen briefing after briefing after briefing from top officials of the Indian military and the Ministry of External Affairs. We have seen video proof of India crushing and dismantling terror launch pads and the critical bases of the Pakistani military. We are seeing the brazen tango of the Pakistani military and political parties rubbing shoulders with terrorists. We have seen Pakistani ministers peddle AI-generated fake news in the National Assembly, and even the Pakistani Prime Minister admit that our BrahMos arsenal decimated their air bases. Yet all of this is not enough for the top opposition leadership and sitting chief ministers from mocking our forces and questioning Operation Sindoor, where India stands victorious on the international stage. You have heard the reactions from a series of Congress leaders, but now Bhagwant Mann, the Chief Minister of Punjab, a crucial border state, the home of brave soldiers who have defended